and welcome to our policy discussion. My name is So-Young Kang. I'm the founder and CEO of Gnowbe, a transformational mobile learning platform. It's my pleasure, my privilege to be here as a young global leader with the World Economic Forum, supporting a good friend, Vikas Pota, who is doing this whole event. And so here we have with us Dr. Rosalia Arteaga from Ecuador. She's the former president and the Minister of Education, so thank you so much for being here. We also have Ms. Leonor Magtoles Briones. She is actually the Education Secretary of State for the Philippines. And so they will actually be on our panel of judges as we go through the policy pitches. So first, we have Maria Paz Mederios from Elige Educar. So I had to practice that before I started. It stands in English for, in English, choose to teach. And so Maria is actually a sociologist. And she has really been passionate about working with educators in Chile to actually help to build a pipeline of talented teachers, especially in low-income household, low-income education. So how do you create the systems and the policies to really create a pipeline of talented teachers and educators? So we look forward to hearing from Maria.
First of all, thank you for being here. So, thank you. Well, what I'm going to start, I'm going to have an idea of how to improve quality in education. Many countries, or most countries, want to improve the quality of education. And there are many ways of doing that. And what we believe in Elige Educar is that the most talent, or the most important talent that a country has, is to attract and have great teachers. If you have great teachers inside your classroom, that's one of the first things that the countries should achieve in order to improve quality in education. But we think that that's not enough. We have to take these great teachers and attract and retain them in the schools where they are most needed, the schools attended by vulnerable children. What is happening in Chile, I come from Chile, a country that's very segmented, and with an educational system very segmented. And what's going on in Chile is that there are a lot of differences in the standardized results test among the schools that have low or attended by high-income families or low-income families. I believe that that's a problem in many countries. And what we know from research is that one of the best ways to tackle or to improve quality inside the classroom is to have great teachers inside them. So this is what we're going to talk today about, or what I'm going to tell you today, is how to attract talented students to become teachers, but also how to attract and retain them in these vulnerable places or low-income neighborhoods. So what's going on in Chile? I have a chart here, or a map. And what you can see here is a distribution of how the schools are, the concentration of vulnerable students inside schools. So in the red, you can see the concentration of schools that have high concentration of vulnerable children. And the green part are those neighborhoods that have schools with low concentration of vulnerable children. And on the other chart, you can see the concentration of the results of teachers inside the teaching evaluation tests. So the red stands for those concentration of teachers that have the worst results on the teaching evaluation test. And the green ones have the best performance on the test. So what you can see is that the best teachers, or the best performing teachers, are tending to concentrate on high-income neighborhoods, and by the other side, those that have the least or least effective or have worst performance are concentrating on the low-income neighborhoods. So we need to tackle this challenge, and what we think is the first thing you have to do is to attract teachers or talented students to become teachers. So who should we attract to this profession? We believe that the most talented students, or the ones that have high academic backgrounds, are the best candidates to attract to this teaching profession. And why do we believe this? When we see the results of the teaching profession, teaching evaluation tests, and we see the academic backgrounds that they had, this is a chart that shows the results on the test that is used for entering the university and these are the results for the teaching evaluation test. When you see those results from teachers that the scores they had when they enter the university and 10 years after, when they are actually teaching, you see there's a lot of correlation, a high correlation between those two results. So the first thing is we have to focus on who we're going to attract, and what we believe is that we have to attract those becoming from the top 20 or top 30% of their generation, considering their academic backgrounds. So how should we do this? And this is the first part of the picture, or the idea. First of all, if you want to attract the most talented students to the teaching profession, you have to, first of all, realize or do a campaign to raise the social appreciation of the teaching profession. You have to create a public awareness of the importance of the teachers, of the role, and also a public awareness of the need to attract talent to this career. If the society don't believe that the teachers are important or are not recognized for their work, it's going to be difficult to attract talent to this career, to this profession. So the first thing we believe is that we have to work on this public image, or the public appreciation of teachers. But media or communications is not the only thing. If you really want to attract this, you have to think of concrete incentives for these talented students to study or to become teachers. So we believe that it's important to have scholarships for talented students to come into teaching training programs. In Chile, we have an example of that. It's called Beca Vocación de Profesor, that it has had good results on the attraction of talented students. So that's something that needs to be ensured. But also, not only the attraction, but you have to form the future teachers. And what we believe is important is that you have to give effective training to work in vulnerable contexts. So the training has to be very connected with what's going on inside schools, what's going on inside classrooms. So that's the first thing that we believe is necessary to attract great teachers into the profession, or the best candidates into the profession. Now, how can we achieve them or take them to this context with these places where there's more vulnerable students? Well, as we said before, this has not happened, and the most effective teachers are not going to these schools. So what can we do? First of all, we believe that some of the most important things is to consider the working conditions and the professional development of teachers inside those schools. As we can see in this chart, there are the differences in wages between schools in blue with no vulnerable students, and the teachers in schools in red that have a concentration of vulnerable students. There's not a significant difference. Chile has done an effort to increase the wages of all teachers, and with that law that was approved this last year, not only increased the wages of all teachers, but also gave a special bonus to those working in places or low-income neighborhoods. But the difference between those wages, we believe, is not enough. It's not significant to attract students. And also, what's most important is at the beginning of the career pathway, there's no difference, and so there's no way to attract to this type of schools. So what we believe should be done is that, first of all, starting salaries, and that's the most important thing, must be significantly higher for teachers working in these schools. And why is it important to increase the starting salaries? Is because what we have seen on research, the first job or the first school where a teacher teaches defines a lot his professional or her professional career pathway. So teachers that for example, go for the first job, go into high-income neighborhoods, it's probably they're going to maintain during their professional life in that type of schools. So we need to have attractive starting salaries, and also, and it's the second thing, we have to think of a more a better career path, a more attractive career pathway to these teachers. So with better starting salaries, but also with better opportunities for teacher development, for professional development, give them more responsibilities, and create an environment for them, attractive environment for them to be working on those places. So those are the first things, but that's half the policy that we think must be done. And the last thing, but we believe it's very important, is that the system has to focus on schools, on these schools. So, what the system has to assure is that the schools have the conditions to become high supportive professional environments. And how can that be done? By focusing on the school principals. So how can you focus on school principals, and what can they do is, for example, to support them and help them to create teaching development plans inside schools. When you have a school principal that's a leader and that has a plan for its teachers, and that has a project, an educational project that's attractive to teachers, that's one of the best ways to retain those teachers inside those schools. So some things that we have seen that may be done in this context or these teaching plans is, for example, to have high expectations of their teachers. And that's not obvious. Not every school principal has high expectation of his teachers and what they can achieve. So first of all, it's important to have principals with high expectations. Second, to create the belief inside the school, inside teachers, inside children, that all children can learn, regardless of their problems, regardless where they're from. So you have to create this belief that all children can learn. And teachers have to have that belief also. Another example is to ensure that teachers have peer collaboration, to give spaces for peer collaboration and support, if needed, for working between them. Also, you have to provide sufficient time for planning, for creativity. And one last thing that we have seen that's very important to ensure in the schools is that the principals may have the balance of giving them autonomy, the teachers' autonomy, but also the support that they need. So if you have all of these spaces or all of these issues considered in your teaching plans, well, it's about probable that your teachers not only be more effective, but also have bigger and better job satisfaction, which has shown to have an effect on the teachers, on the students' learning. So that we believe if you consider all these policies and the school working to retain its teachers, it's going to be possible to have and retain good and effective teachers inside these schools, with that having an effect on reversing socioeconomic gaps that students can have. So that's the main idea of what I wanted to talk today.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing. I think I'll just invite some questions and from the floor, as well as from our judges. So let's start with our judges first. We'll start with our judges first.
Thank you. Congratulations. I think you make a key point talking about empowering and stimulating best talents to be teachers. One thing that I want to put more in the floor is about self-esteem how to improve self-esteem of the teachers, because it's good to have good salaries and a lot of things that you mentioned here, but self-esteem is a very big issue. I want you to try to speak a little bit more about self-esteem.
Okay. Well, when I was talking that we need teachers to have or schools to have a professional environment, and that the school principal can have good expectations and of what the teachers can achieve, I believe that has to also be given to teachers. So teachers have to know that they have to work and they have to believe that they can achieve and that they're important. So first, you can work by that in a school, in your school environment. The teacher has to work with that for self-esteem. I think that's very important. And also, if you raise the public awareness of the importance of teachers, you also have to do that among teachers. We organized the Global Teacher Prize in Chile, a Chilean version, and we invited to teachers to apply, great teachers to apply. And what we saw the most was that teachers said, well, I'm not, why should I apply? There was no self-esteem, so it's a great point to put here. So you have to work also with the public awareness among teachers of the importance of their profession.
We organized also a big award ceremony in Ecuador for teachers, not only from Ecuador, but from Latin America.
Great.
Excellent.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Atea. Just so I can see better. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I agree with you that the quality of teachers have to be improved and maintained, especially for vulnerable sectors of the population. Your recommendations are based on some of your observations, two major observations. One is that the best performing teachers tend to concentrate in high income neighborhoods. This might be true, but this may not necessarily be true as well, because you have really outstanding and really inspiring situations of teachers who are off in the poor neighborhood, who are in poor neighborhoods or in far-off places, far-off islands in our case, or out there in the mountains, or where there are serious peace problems, but are considered the best teachers. It's not the correlation between high-income neighborhoods, rich students, and well-paid teachers may not necessarily be true all the time. And the second observation in your studies that there is also a correlation between good performing teachers and then the higher academic backgrounds. Again, this might be generally true, but we also have outstanding teachers. The challenge, I believe, is to search them out, because if that is the case, we will only be awarding the PhDs.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll only be recognizing the PhDs, while you have all those who are out really and truly serving the needed. So if these are your assumptions, then your recommendations will probably have to be re-examined. Also, to appreciate, there should be greater social appreciation of the teaching profession. In Asia, the most respected people are teachers. The greatest political leaders are teachers. Jesus Christ was a teacher. Buddha taught. Are really those probably the greatest humans that has been produced by our race are teachers. So they tend to be very highly respected wherever they are. I agree with you on the matter of the scholarships, because these are important for their career advancement. But also, I think we also need to look, because it would seem from your observations that the main motivation for best performing teachers and good performing teachers is the level of income and the value system. So you become a teacher because it's higher paying. You become a specialist for special students because it is high paying. I think we also need to look, this is why, as I said, your recommendations probably will have to be re-examined. For example, we have to look at what the universities are teaching and how they produce the teachers.
Yes.
What are they introducing values? Are they introducing dedication? Are they introducing love and so on for those who are less fortunate? Otherwise, the very best people will just be concentrating in the richest parts of the country. So increasing motivation and dedication to the profession of teaching is very important, and universities, society
Have to work
is
with
crucial to this, and not necessarily, not only the high salaries or the stature of a high-paying high-paying neighborhood. Because I worry that the conclusions that are reached might lead to probably inadequate policy responses. So those are just my comments. If you'd like to respond, I'd be very
Yes.
happy.
Yes, regarding the last comment, I agree with you. I agree with you, and that's why I said that until the salaries, that was half the part, that was half of the public policy. But the second and most important thing is that the system or the policy has to focus on schools. You have to have attractive schools, attractive educational projects, and schools and principals with a lot of leadership that can really develop this plan inside the or teaching plans, and to encourage their teachers to be better every day. So what you create in your school, I believe, is one of the most important things that helps retain teachers on those schools.
Thank you.
You perhaps, in addition to your scholarships, you have to think of the reward and recognition system.
Yeah.
In the Philippines, for example, there is an annual award by the largest bank in the country to seek out teachers who teach well under conditions of war, of destabilization. Teachers who teach well where there is no paper at all, where children have to write on the leaves on banana leaves, or we have to cross rivers and so on. Because as I said, I really worry about your assumption that those who teach well are in the rich neighborhood. So there has to be a system of recognition, and that could be a very good policy proposal. You seek out those who are unknown and who are not recognized otherwise, and who continue to serve. And also an examination of the curricula of the universities who produce these teachers.
Thank you so much, Ms. Magtoles Briones. We have a question from the back.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you to introduce yourself, please.
I'm Dr. Rai. We train teachers to change their attitudes. I fully endorse the views of Madam Secretary Philippines. Teaching, no doubt, as you have said, requires a support from the government in respect of salary and other facilities. Fully agreed. But madam, the best teachers ever in the world have been those who have worked with a passion of self-actualization. Self-actualization. This is Abraham Maslow, the man who is known for his research as to what are the motives through which a teacher or anybody works in the best. Is self-actualization. What we can contribute to society. That should be teacher. I have seen teachers even drawing the best salary, they do not give their best. So the teacher is a profession. The teacher in medicine, I'm a doctor, let me tell you. In terms of money, let me tell you, but if I'm a surgeon and if I see somebody dying, I will leave everything else and I will be there. The job is of half an hour. I entered thinking half an hour. I have attained my son's birthday in Delhi in All India Institute, but 6 hours surgery I took and I got the patient all right. So for teachers, there should be a passion for teaching, and he is the best teacher. That is my submission. Money should be. I do agree. I do agree. Thank you.
Okay, Maria, would you take this? You want to make a comment?
Well, yes, I believe that's the role of teachers, and that's why we have to assure that the people recognize, the society recognize the value of those teachers. And what happens, and it's interesting what we say, that in Asia that doesn't matter, but that doesn't happen, but in Chile and in many other countries in Latin America, there's no recognition of the teaching profession because of so that's what we have to change. We have to recognize those stories that you say, and that's what we have to believe and make them believe. So, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and respect them and support them. So that's what yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think given time, we're going to wrap up. So thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so in terms of policy, I think we're going to be taking an informal vote on the policy. So those in favor of our policy, please show a raise of hands. I believe that the team is actually... Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Okay, the next session we're going to talk about, I think we agree there's a lot of different root causes, to actually explore as you're talking about the future of teacher education, whether it's motivations, looking at the overall ecosystem, the university systems, how are they getting educated before they get into the classroom. Once they're in the classroom, then how do you actually create that right environment, as well as all the incentives and the rewards, recognitions, and systems I think that are needed. So I think that was a very, very healthy discussion. So I think as we move on to the next policy conversation, thank you so much, I'm excited to introduce Tony Jackson. He's from Asia Society. So he's actually, he leads the Center for Global Education for the Asia Society, which really is focused on how to enable students to actually enter into the global workforce in the 21st century. And so he's done a lot of work around advancing education and global competence. He actually directed the Carnegie Corporation's task force on the education of young adolescents, which produced the report Turning Points, Educating Adolescents in the 21st Century. And he's co-authored similar blueprints, Turning Points 2000. So we're very excited to hear his plans for how do you actually develop the future global leaders. Tony.
Sure, thanks. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you. What I actually want to talk about is sort of the theme of this conference. This conference is about how do we create real global citizens. And what I want to talk about are sort of three really practical approaches from the policy perspective that we can actually do that. So how do we go from the theory to action and actually making that happen? But let me start by saying that it's universally true that young people emerging into adulthood in the 21st century, they're coming into an interconnected and diverse and rapidly changing world. In all countries, global economic, digital, cultural, demographic, all these kinds of changes are making for a very different kind of environment and shaping young people's lives. So the world's growing complexity and diversity present both an opportunity and a challenge, and this is what Andreas was talking about this morning. On the one hand, globalization can bring innovation, new perspectives, a higher standard of living, but can also, as we've seen around the world, lead to economic inequality and social division. Crossing borders, for some, represents the opportunity to reach new markets, where for others, it's a desperate attempt to escape war and poverty. So we can debate the merits of globalization all we want, but the fact is, this is our world today. And what is undeniable is that young people must be prepared for this new complex world. I mean, certainly families and communities have a lot to say on that, but really education is the key. And so the question becomes, what is the knowledge and the skills and the dispositions that students need to have to be well prepared, and what can education systems do to develop these capacities? Well, again, as Andreas this morning was alluding to, the concept of global competence is a response to these questions. Global competence is a person's capacity to address issues of local, global, and intercultural significance, to take multiple perspectives, to interact successfully with others while respecting their dignity and their rights, and also ultimately to take action, to use what you know to make the world a better place. Now, certainly, as was mentioned, educating for global competency can improve employability. I mean, certainly work readiness today in an interconnected world requires that young people not only understand world issues and opportunities that shape the world, but they have to have the capacity to work within diverse teams with people from very different backgrounds. So in fact, the competitive advantage will go to those who value diversity as the spark of creativity and innovation that's required to drive economies forward. Now, this is true in multinational corporations, but it's also true in construction sites, in agricultural work, and in small businesses, where getting the job done increasingly means getting the job done with people who are very different from yourself or from different parts of the world. So education for global competence can also promote intercultural understanding and respectful interactions that are really at a premium in this increasingly diverse societies that we live in. Now, I think we all know that conflicts reflecting misunderstanding and animosity between ethnic and cultural groups have become the most common source of political violence in the world, and they show no sign of abating. So the explosion of indiscriminate violence in the name of religious or ethnic affiliations make it clear that for people to live peacefully together in proximity to each other, they have to be able to develop the capacities to accept differences and to find common ground and to effectively resolve conflicts without dispute. Now, the important thing is these capacities and values that we honor so much and we believe so much in this society, but certainly in this conference, these are things that have to be taught and learned. They're not going to happen spontaneously. They have to be taught and they have to be learned. So education for global competence, or it's also often called education for global citizenship, it responds to the need to form new generations who have these skills to be able to solve social and political and certainly ecological sustainability issues as well. The crucial role of global citizenship education is recognized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which calls for action by all countries to ensure that all learners have the knowledge and skills needed for global citizenship, for appreciation of cultural difference, and understand culture's contribution to sustaining development, sustainable development. And make no mistake though, educating for global competence is not only about learning to honor and respect other cultures. It is absolutely about developing deep knowledge and respect and connections to one's own culture. I love the expression from Singapore, which is that globally competent youth are globally minded, but nationally rooted. So how well education systems can modernize to prepare students to thrive amid today's global economies and global economic and civic environments really will determine the future and the prosperity of your nations and of societies. So I think there are three critical policy levers that can steadily increase the capacity of education systems to develop globally competent youth. They have to do with curriculum, with teacher capacity, and technology. So first, nations can revise their national curriculum and other frameworks that express what students are expected to learn to explicitly require development of the 4 domains of global competence: the ability to critically investigate the world, to take multiple perspectives, to effectively communicate with people from different countries and different cultures, and to take responsible action for collective well-being. Together, these domains of global competence, they form a sort of a comprehensive framework that OECD has developed and member states have approved based significantly on the work that we've done at Asian Society and other NGOs and organizations around the world to bring forth as the way in which they're going to help frame how global competence is assessed. The framework provides guidance for conducting the kinds of examinations of national curriculum that I'm talking about, as well as being able to ultimately create curriculum guidelines for teachers so they'll know how to integrate these competencies into their practice. And an important driver of change will be the inclusion of global competence in national assessment systems. Now, as I mentioned, OECD in 2018, as Andrea showed this morning, will be including the assessment of global competence in their PISA assessment. So it's an opportunity for all OECD nations and affiliated economies to actually sort of set a benchline for future growth. But it's quite frankly also an opportunity for any nation to see how global competence can be assessed and to have a model, if you will, to be able to work then towards developing your own frameworks for measuring global competence in your own countries. So, revising the curriculum is first. The second policy initiative is to systematically improve the individual and collective capacity of teachers to teach for global competence. Now, there was a recent UNESCO study entitled Preparing and Supporting Teachers in the Asia-Pacific to Meet the Challenges of the 21st Century that concluded that teachers throughout the Asia-Pacific region recognize the need to respond to 21st century challenges, but they need more support to make the approach a reality in their classrooms. They don't have the capacity to do that, even though they know exactly what's needed. And I would say if that same sort of a survey was done in any country, in any continent, you'd have the same pattern in the data. The people that can understand that what has happened in schools traditionally isn't enough now, and we need to do better, we need to do more, but the issue of competency, the issue of capacity is a huge one. So in their pre-service training then, the content knowledge and pedagogical skills required to teach for global competence should be explicitly taught and assessed in their coursework, in their practical experiences, and their induction experiences in schools. Similarly, for in-service teachers, governments can invest in regular job-embedded opportunities to develop the required capacities. Now, there's two important things to bear in mind in this context. First, we cannot assume that the teachers we are asking to develop global competence in youth are themselves globally competent. And that's not a knock on teachers. It's just a fact of the matter that many, many adults have not had experiences in their own lives, in their own education to develop these kinds of competencies. So teacher training in this area, therefore, has to include opportunities for teachers to learn by doing. That is, to experience themselves high-quality global learning and skill development, especially in their interactions with peers around the world via technology, as I'll describe in just a minute, as the foundation for the development of these capacities in youth. Teachers have to experience what it is they're going to be teaching their young people. And so I think in that context, treating teachers as curious, capable learners is the first step in developing their capacity to teach for global competence. Second, learning to teach for global competence, it's got to be integrated within disciplinary instruction. Teaching for global competence is not going to be successful if it's sort of an add-on or comes after the regular curriculum. It has to actually be developed through a reimagined approach to disciplinary learning. I mean, science, mathematics, history, language arts, the arts themselves, all of these are pathways, or can be made to be pathways, for the development of global competence. Again, rooted in deep understanding of content knowledge, and then having the opportunity to apply and learn that content knowledge within a global context. So, we have the curriculum, we have the teacher training. A third critical policy action is to provide incentives and resources for the effective use of technology to advance global competence for both students and teachers. Now, digital technologies are already shaping the lives of young people. We know this every day. And the digital lives of young people, on the one hand, can be greatly liberating and amplify their voice, but it can also have the result of disconnecting them from deeper human engagements and distort their perceptions of others by limiting their interactions to a small set of people who have commonly, with whom they already have much in common. So while there's enormous potential for online networks and social media and interactive technologies, these are really huge opportunities to catalyze learning styles where youth themselves see themselves as the master of their own learning fate, as it were. They're in charge of their learning, and while they are engaging in communication and collaboration with peers from around the world. But education systems must guide young people in using digital technology to better understand the world they live in, to appreciate and embrace cultural differences, and again, to express their voices responsibly. Now, for teachers, leveraging digital technology to support professional learning is really critical if we want to have that kind of capacity building at scale. And in the context of global competence, digital learning for teachers is essential in order for really to be able to free them from the isolation of their own classrooms and to connect them through learning networks and other opportunities to learn with peers from around the world. I mean, developing global competence requires global connectivity for teachers as much as it does for students. And as well, learning online, teachers have access to international best practice and to multiple sources and perspectives on rapidly changing and global issues, so that they can incorporate those issues into their own classroom, so they can learn from the world and with the world and include that in their classroom instruction. So let me then just conclude by saying that, again, we live in what you've probably heard many times, a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, where global interdependencies create enormous opportunities, but also enormous risks. Educating youth in the 4 dimensions of global competence that undergird global citizenship will allow them to be both globally competitive and, just as importantly, globally collaborative. And it's essential, really, for their well-being and for the well-being of all of us. So to provide these, this kind of education, again, 3 essential policy strategies: revising the curriculum, developing the capacity of teachers, and investing in technology to instantiate teaching for global competence at scale. Now, these are the policy pathways to develop globally competent youth who are deeply attached to their own cultures and respectful of others, and without whom no nation really can survive and prosper in the 21st century. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tony. Any questions from our judges? From our judges first, any questions, comments? No? Okay. Yes, Madam Secretary.
I completely agree with your views on your recommendations, for example, to take into consideration the curriculum, which has to be geared towards global citizenship, improving teacher capacity, and third, the use of technology. But all this put together, for example, for small countries or even lower middle income countries, would really be a very massive financing, will require massive financing. For example, on the preparation of the curriculum, there will be a need for a great number of consultants to work the curriculum. We underwent that experience from kindergarten to K-12 for basic education, and that was a really huge effort. Now, on the improvement of teacher capacity, we have 674,000 teachers and still counting when we are going to introduce the last grade in K-12. And the requirement for upgrading, etc., again, will be tremendous cost. And there's already a lot of anxiety among the legislators on the possible financing costs on this requirement. And then even in the use of technology, I'm not a techie person because my generation, we did everything by hand. And we memorized all our calculations in our heads. But I believe in the use of technology. It's the only way we can move forward with such a huge bureaucracy, 44,000 schools and 24.9 million learners. So we have to rely on technology. Again, that is quite a very expensive undertaking, and we have been talking to servers. Now, so I have only one question, since I agree with your recommendations. What can you suggest in the way of financing all these necessary steps which have to be undertaken, aside from the usual borrowing, the usual donor-driven exercises and so on? Are there creative ways of financing education so that we produce globally competent learners, as you were suggesting?
Yeah, I don't have a magic formula for how we increase the finances available for this kind of change, except to say that there's 2 things. One, I think a lot of the kinds of ways in which the kind of changes I'm talking about now can, even at the level of examining curriculum or national curriculum, there are lots of examples around the globe that one can draw from that might sort of shortcut, as it were, the necessity of bringing lots and lots of consultants in. And I also think, frankly, that examination of one's national curriculum, or certainly the curriculum within a school, ought to be part of what teachers themselves are engaged in. So, in effect, I mean, there can be more of a crowdsourcing approach to this that really takes the expertise of teachers and others in other industries who have something to say that's valuable and begins to work it into the process in a way that isn't necessarily the same kind of absolutely formal, highly expensive approach that approach to doing it. But the other point I would say, though, is that even absent that kind of massive revisiting of a national curriculum, there are ways to begin to instantiate this kind of global approach and develop global competencies in a much more sort of contained and practical way that we actually, in our work at Asian Society, have been doing for quite a long time. For example, simply helping teachers to know how do you take, for example, a global issue, energy, or girls' education, or poverty and hunger, and how do you use that as a basis of a project within which you can begin to sort of bring in algebra, bring in history, bring in the literature, so that it's not a massive rehaul necessarily, but rather just a rethinking, a reframing of curriculum and of teaching in a very practical sense. And I think as well, the opportunity for teachers to dialogue with each other via technology or the old-fashioned way of talking to each other, getting together and talking, is also a really important way to begin to develop that kind of capacity that doesn't necessarily require a huge new investment. It really is, again, trying to make use of the resources and the expertise that you have within the system already, but reframing it towards a different end and with a different goal in mind, as it were. But it's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you. And
Sorry.
questions from the audience? Gentleman in the back.
Yes, thank you. My name is Will McGuire. I work with Abu Dhabi Education Council currently. I really agree with all three of your points, and I really appreciate the time you gave us with your thoughts.
Sure.
One of the things I'm very happy about is PISA is going to start measuring global competencies. But I fear that by the time, and we're both from the U.S. originally, I think by the time that test trickles down to the school level, at least where I'm from, it's going to be quite a few years, and we know that what gets measured or what gets tested gets taught.
Right.
I think the problem, other than the 3 points you mentioned, is what we heard earlier today. It's the box. So as a former principal of a school of 800 students, it was one of the most successful schools in the state of Maryland. We had hundreds of kids at 8th grade level that read at the 12th grade level. But when the superintendent of the school system, his contract relies on increased test scores, it's more important from his perspective that the test scores rise that fraction of a %. So that becomes, on the ground, time becomes the issue. So you had mentioned project-based is huge, and project-based really, in my belief, is the answer to the global competency issue. But I mentioned this last year at the conference, and I think I had the pleasure of asking Tony Blair, but he chose to answer a different question. It was about differentiated educational policy. I think, and maybe my question is more, are you hearing any of this? Because I believe until leaders or policymakers allow us to have more time within the day to address project-based learning, that will solve many of these questions. And it's not, I don't even see teacher intelligence or teacher understanding as the limiting factor. Time is the limiting factor, I believe.
Right.
But until we have permission as administrators to take the time for a soft skill that's not easily measured, no one's going to do it.
Yep.
Because their check depends on it. Their superintendent's check, whether they continue to be a principal. So do you hear any of those kind of conversations back home or anywhere that maybe differentiated ed policy that gives an administrator permission to, once a student's reading at, say, 3 grade levels above, we can stop teach reading specifically for maybe a little bit of time so we can pursue some policy-based, product-based learning?
I hear the conversation, but I hear also the frustration you're talking about as well. I mean, you have pockets where certainly more at the principal level or at the school level or at the district level where there's an opportunity structure where, for example, charter schools that actually are able to pursue these kinds of policies are supported. But ultimately it's because the kids still do really well on the state-mandated test. So I think one of the issues is, can we think about ways in which we don't make the kind of pedagogical approaches we're talking about the enemy of necessarily the kind of outcomes that superintendents, I mean, it is the currency it's the coin of the realm. And so one of the things we've done at Asian Society, for example, and all the work we've done, we actually have established 2 kinds of performance outcomes for students. One is performance outcomes with regard to global competence. So we've literally thought through 5th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. What is what does student work look like that exhibits global competence? And at the same time, we've related those to the Common Core, to the extent that that's still a driving force in the United States. The notion is, can we align and can we show teachers how they can both address the standards of their state as well as address standards of global competence in the same breath, as it were. And so I think that's part of our tact has been to not make these things sort of polar opposites of each other. Although I do have my own strong feelings about the overemphasis on testing. But given the practical realities that our administrators and our educators are facing, is there a way to help them achieve some of the outcomes we want and still have the outcomes that politically they're going to need to have? So it's a delicate balance, but it's a tough one. It's a tough question. So you probably want to ask that same question next year as well, I'm sure.
Right. Thank you so much, Tony.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.